By the time the harvest moon rises over the red clay fields of Prince Edward Island this autumn, a fundamental shift in North American logistics will be physically manifest on the docks. In a landmark move, the Canadian Food Inspection Agency, CFIA, has finalized a comprehensive trade protocol that will see Canadian-grown potatoes, both for fresh table consumption and industrial processing, shipped directly into the heart of Mexico. This isn't just a minor win for the agricultural sector, it is a calculated geopolitical pivot. As industry experts like Nicole Weisberg have noted, while PEI is the spiritual home of the Canadian potato, Alberta has quietly surged to become the nation's top producer by volume. For the farmers of the prairies and the Maritimes alike, this deal represents a life raft of market diversification. The message from the CFIA and the producers is unanimous. In a world of volatile neighbors, having only one customer is no longer a business plan. It is a catastrophic risk. If you look past the crates and the shipping containers, this decision reveals a burgeoning sentiment that has been simmering in the Canadian heartland for years. It is a narrative defined by frustration, a hard-earned sense of independence, and a growing refusal to remain tethered to an American neighbor that has become increasingly protectionist. What appears to be a standard export agreement is, in reality, a signal that the special relationship is being audited. For decades, the assumption was that the U.S. was the endless customer. Today, that assumption is being replaced by a strategy of resilience. Canadian farmers are no longer asking how they can better serve the American market. They are asking how they can survive without it. To understand the weight of this Mexican pivot, we must look back at the 40-year golden age of North American trade. For nearly half a century, the economic bond between Ottawa and Washington was the most stable and integrated partnership in human history. Every morning, thousands of transport trucks crossed the 49th parallel, carrying a seamless flow of machinery, energy, and food. Entire industries, from automotive assembly in Ontario to potato farming in PEI, were built on the bedrock of predictability. The border wasn't a barrier, it was a conveyor belt. For the rural communities of Canada, the American consumer wasn't just a buyer, they were the singular foundation of the local economy. The erosion of this trust didn't happen overnight. It was a death by 1,000 cuts. Friction began to appear in sectors where cooperation once seemed immutable. The Dairy Deadlock. Constant disputes over quotas created a permanent state of legal warfare. The steel and aluminum shock. The sudden imposition of Section 232 tariffs on Canadian metals, under the guise of national security, shattered the myth that allies were exempt from protectionist strikes. The softwood lumber saga. Decades of litigation turned a simple commodity trade into a symbol of American litigiousness. Each of these disputes added a new layer of the uncertainty tax. Canadian exporters began to realize that the rules of the game were no longer fixed. They were subject to the shifting winds of American domestic politics. The definitive turning point arrived with the rise of the America First doctrine. For the first time in the post-war era, a U.S. administration explicitly signaled that long-term allies would be treated not as partners in a shared ecosystem, but as zero-sum competitors. While this rhetoric resonated in the Rust Belt, it sent shockwaves through the Canadian prairies. The realization was sobering. Access to the American market was no longer a right conferred by a treaty. It was a privilege that could be revoked with a single executive order. The special relationship had been replaced by a transactional relationship. Canadian businesses heard the message loud and clear. Diversify or perish. This is where the humble russet Burbank potato becomes a strategic asset. Prince Edward Island produces a potato recognized globally for its quality, perfect for the frozen fry industry and the high-end culinary market. Historically, these spuds traveled south to Boston and New York. But when the northern door began to creak, Canadian producers looked further south, to Mexico. With a population exceeding 130 million people and a rapidly expanding middle class, Mexico represents a massive, untapped demand for high-quality food processing. Crucially, Mexico's domestic climate isn't suited for the large-scale production of the specific russet varieties required for global fast food standards. This creates a perfect commercial synergy. The CFIA's deal isn't just about finding a new buyer, it's about spreading risk. By entering the Mexican market, Canadian farmers are ensuring that even if a trade war erupts in Washington, the assembly lines in Mexico City and Guadalajara will still be calling for Canadian starch. This shift is occurring within the framework of the United States-Mexico-Canada Agreement, USMCA. While this treaty was meant to preserve the spirit of NAFTA, its renegotiation served as a stark reminder of the sword of Damocles hanging over Canadian trade. The Sunset Clause and the constant threat of withdrawal have taught Canadian industries that a trade agreement is only as strong as the political will of the current occupant of the White House. For the potato farmer in Alberta, the USMCA is no longer a shield. It's a temporary truce. Diversification is the only permanent protection. In the modern economic landscape, diversification is the new synonym for survival. This is the China plus one strategy applied to the North American farm. If the primary market becomes volatile, the secondary market must be ready to absorb the volume. This isn't a move born of hostility toward the United States. It is a move born of resilience. It is the recognition that in a protectionist world, a nation's strength is measured by the number of open doors it maintains. For Canadian agriculture, Mexico is more than a customer. It is an insurance policy against American unpredictability. What makes this potato deal so fascinating is how perfectly it reflects the broader psychology of 21st century trade. We are witnessing a quiet, global transformation. Nations that once relied on a single super partner are now decentralizing their economic ties. This shift isn't happening in dramatic summit speeches. It's happening in the quiet decisions of farm cooperatives and the signing of phytosanitary protocols. The potato is the canary in the coal mine. It tells us that the era of the unipolar North American market is over. Today it is potatoes. Tomorrow it will be critical minerals, hydrogen energy, and advanced manufacturing. In a world defined by geopolitical black swans and sudden tariff spikes, even a shipment of tubers tells a story of national determination. The quiet decisions made in the rural communities of PEI and Alberta are reshaping the map of North American commerce. Canada is learning that true economic independence doesn't come from building walls. It comes from building more roads. The message for 2026 is clear. The special relationship may be fading, but Canadian industry is finding its own way forward. Because in the end, the most valuable currency in global trade isn't the dollar, it's the ability to choose where you go next.